Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Migration Speaker Event, a conversation with Karla Cornejo Villavicencio on her book, The Undocumented Americans. My name is Danielle Berkowitz-Sklar, and I am a junior studying development sociology. I am a part of the inaugural cohort of undergraduate migration scholars. We are a group of undergraduate students who are passionate about studying critical migrations issues through a multidisciplinary lens. We are working with the Einaudi Center's immigration team and Cornell Migration's Global Grand Challenge. We would like to thank Cornell University's Migrations Initiative for hosting this discussion, which is part of a larger speaker series that is called Reimagining Citizenship. This initiative studies how all living things migrate from place to place on our planet, and you can engage with more of this work through upcoming events such as a film series with Cornell Cinema, and a new podcast called Migrations, A World on the Move. If you would like to learn more, please visit migrations.cornell.edu/learn. So as we begin today's program, I would first like to acknowledge the land on which many of us are on today. Cornell University is located on the traditional homelands of the Gayokono, the Cayuga Nation. The Gayokono are members of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, an alliance of 6 sovereign nations with a historic and contemporary presence on this land. The Confederacy precedes the establishment of Cornell University, New York State, and the United States of America. We acknowledge the painful history of the Gayokono dispossession and honor the ongoing connection of Gayokono people, past and present, to these lands and waters. This acknowledgement does not exist in the past or in historical context, but with the recognition that colonialism is a current ongoing process, and we need to build our mindfulness on our present participation. We would like to thank Cornell Law School, Cornell Dean of Students Office, Dream Team, the Department of Romance Studies, and Alt Breaks for sponsoring this discussion. I am so honored to be introducing Professor Jacqueline Kelly Widmer, who will be moderating the event and will introduce Karla Cornejo Villavicencio and the other panelists. Jacqueline Kelly Widmer directs the 1L Immigration Law and Advocacy Clinic and teaches lawyering at Cornell Law. The clinic represents immigrant clients in applications for DACA, naturalization, asylum, and also conducts public advocacy on various immigration topics. Before coming to Cornell in 2017, Professor Kelly Widmer practiced in San Francisco at a small nonprofit where she focused on representing immigrant youth and their families in their applications for immigration relief. She previously taught at the University of California, Berkeley School of Law and clerked at the San Francisco Immigration Court. She graduated from the University of Michigan Law School and Ithaca College. And so now I will pass it on to you. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Danielle. It's a pleasure to be here today. I want to briefly introduce the 3 other panelists before I get to introducing our main speaker today. First, we have Julia Jun. She is a second-year PhD student in psychology, and she's a graduate assistant in the Undocumented and DACA student office. We're also joined by Stella Lenardi. She's a junior in the School of Industrial Labor Relations here at Cornell, and she's a member of Cornell's Dream Team student group. Finally, Don Izakor. He is a JD, also MBA, also LLM student, and he's a current student in the Cornell 1L Immigration Law and Advocacy Clinic that I direct, as Danielle mentioned. So these are 3 student panelists joining us from across the university to have our speaker here today, Karla Cornejo Villavicencio. I'm so excited to welcome you, Karla, virtually to Cornell. With the publication of her debut book, The Undocumented Americans, Karla became the first undocumented finalist for a National Book Award. Her book was also named by Barack Obama as one of his favorite books of 2020 and selected as one of the best books of the year by the New York Times, Time, NPR, the New York Public Library, Book Riot, Vulture, and the Library Journal. Karla has written about immigration, music, beauty, and mental illness for the New York Times, The Atlantic, The New Republic, Glamour, Elle, Vogue, N+1, and The New Inquiry, among other publications. A graduate of Harvard University and a doctoral candidate in the American Studies program at Yale, Karla lives in New Haven with her partner and their dog. So welcome, Karla. We're so excited to be in conversation with you today.
Thank you. It's really nice to be here.
I know that the first thing we're going to do is have you do a little bit of reading from some of your work today.
Oh, were we? Okay. Let me get my book. I usually don't like doing readings because I am a millennial and I have a short attention span. So I'm going to just give you a taste of my voice. Okay. August 1st, 2019. If you ask my mother where she's from, she is 100% going to say she's from the Kingdom of God, because she does not like to say that she's from Ecuador, Ecuador being one of the few South American countries that has not especially outdone itself on the international stage. Magical realism basically skipped over it, as did the military dictatorship craze of the 1970s and 1980s. Plus, there are no world-famous Ecuadorians to speak of other than the fool who housed Julian Assange at the embassy in London, the president, and Cristina Aguilera's father, who was a domestic abuser. If you ask my father where he is from, he will definitely say Ecuador because he is sentimental about the country for reasons he's working out in therapy. But if you push them, I mean really push them, they're both going to say they're from New York. If you ask them if they feel American because you're a little narc who wants to prove your blood runs red, white, and blue, they're going to say, no, we feel like New Yorkers. We really do too. My family has lived in Brooklyn and Queens a combined 97 years. My father drove a cab back when East New York was still gang country, and he had to fold his body into a little origami swan and hide under his steering wheel during crossfires in the middle of the day while he ate a jumbo slice of pizza. Times have changed, but my parents haven't. My dad sees struggling bodegas and he says they're fronts. For what? Money laundering. For whom? The mob. My mother wants my brother and me to wear pastels all year round to avoid being seen as taking sides in the little tiff between the Bloods and the Crips. My parents are New Yorkers to the core. Despite how close we are, we've talked very little about their first days in New York or about their decision to choose New York or even the United States as the destination. It's not that I haven't asked my parents why they came to the United States. It's that the answer isn't as morally satisfying as most people's answers are. A decapitated family member, famine, and I never press them for more details because I don't want to apply pressure on a bruise. The story, as far as I know it, goes something like this. My parents had gotten married in Cotopaxi, Ecuador, and their small auto body business was not doing well. Then my dad got into a car crash. The idea of coming to America for work for a year to make just enough money to pay off the debt came up and it seemed like a good idea. That's about as much as I know. You may be wondering why my parents agreed to leave me as an economic... Oh yeah, did I read this? My father's family asked me to keep me 18 months old at the time as collateral. I didn't read my book after I submitted it. So sometimes when I do readings, I edit along the way. So I edit that part out. So you may be wondering why my parents agreed to leave me as economic assurance, but the truth is I have not had this conversation with them. I've never thought about it enough to ask. The whole truth is that if I was a young mother, if it was me as a young mother, unparented, ambitious at my sexual prime, I think I would be thrilled to leave my child for exactly a year, as I said it would be, which is what the plan was. I never had to forgive my mom. And then I talk about my dad, which I don't want to do right now.
Thank you so much, Karla. The opening of your book, I think at least some of those parts are drawn from the very opening, and I found it so powerful to read and get this unique insight into a family story that isn't maybe told as often as other kinds of immigrant narratives. And I know the students have some questions for you about narratives a little bit later today. I wanted to start by, just for the rest of the audience that maybe is not as familiar with immigration or immigration terms, the idea of the meaning of the term undocumented that is in the title of your book. I would be happy to sort of say legally where that term comes from. And then, Karla, I'd love to hear what you think about that term. But I wanted to first note that we usually we want to avoid saying the word illegal or other kinds of terms that are outdated and offensive. Instead, we use undocumented. And legally, there's two ways to become undocumented. Either someone comes on a visa and overstays that visa, or someone walks over the border. So those are the two legal ways that someone might become undocumented. And Karla, I was wondering if you could share any thoughts about the use of that term, and could you also tell us why you don't mention anyone's immigration status directly in the book, other than your family members, I think?
I think I was in college maybe when the AP switched over, the Associated Press switched over in the guidebook, which then the rest of media tends to follow either both the Associated Press and the New York Times guidebook for style, from using illegal immigrant as the official term to undocumented immigrant. And that's a place where you see the hard work of activism paying off. And I think I was pretty emotional about the decision. Nowadays, I care less, but that's just me. Like, I obviously, when I don't want anyone in my community who is an immigrant or who's undocumented being called an illegal immigrant. Obviously, in noun form, unillegal is a slur, illegal alien. I did an event where someone who worked in government pointed out that the Library of Congress classifies my book under, I think, illegal alien or illegal immigration. And I told him I wasn't bothered by that because I don't expect the Library of Congress to, it's an institution and it's a bureaucracy that I don't expect anything from, but I was bothered when Google Books classified my book under social science, when it's a literary work, it's a work of art. And I wonder where my book came out during the pandemic. So I haven't seen it in bookstores, and I don't want to because I don't think it's going to be where I want it to be. I think I'm curious where people are going to classify it, even though it was a finalist for the National Book Award and all of that. I think the dehumanization that worries me isn't so much in bureaucratic terms, but it's in the lived experience of immigrants. So as an artist, the dehumanization that I experience is when people, ask me to comment on policy. And I'm like, I have no idea, I don't even pronounce DACA right. And so that's the dehumanization that personally affects me. If I see a legal alien on a form, I don't care.
Thank you. That's really interesting. And makes me think about also the Biden administration currently proposing to change that term alien that's actually written into our immigration laws and make the term non-citizen, which is another term sometimes people use instead of undocumented. And
I think that's gaslighting, like change policies. Like I have a little, little alien being, taken up by a spaceship. I think, if someone were to call my mom an illegal alien during a hate crime, the hate crime is what would bother me. But, if someone were to be like, you little illegal alien, and then like, give me $1 million book deal, like, what does the term mean? It's gaslighting to be like, we're going to change the paperwork that makes it absolutely impossible for you to get citizenship to say non-citizen. That's like, the love of your life being like, I'm still going to never return your texts, but, I'm going to, negate. I'm not going to say that I don't love you. I'm going to say that I don't not love, it's just like, it's just major gaslighting.
It's a semantic change, and it doesn't actually reflect any change in the substantive law, as you were saying. It doesn't make it a path any easier or harder on the legal perspective. I was going to also ask you, throughout your book, you talk about people from all different parts of the United States or several different areas in the United States, and also they are from other countries previous to living in the United States, but you don't mention whether people are citizens or whether they're undocumented. Could you talk to us about what choices you made in portraying people's information in that way?
Sure. I think some people I set out to write about undocumented people. And so the presumption is that people that I talk to are like the main protagonists are undocumented. Mm-hmm. But when you're undocumented, you cycle in and out of statuses, and everyone in your family is cycling through, and in your community. Being undocumented is a legal status, but it's also an experience and a life. It's a lifestyle. It's a life. There's a lot of mixed status families. In one of the characters, when I visit her, she's undocumented. And then a year later, when I visit her again, she has her green card, and she has had a total transformation. And when I wrote the book, I was on DACA. And then now that I am, the paperback has come out, this beautiful pink, I'm a permanent resident. But my parents are still undocumented. I have members of my family that are still undocumented. I'm not like, I'm going to like change my, I'm still so rooted in the community. So it's the paperwork can change, but my nightmares are still similar. The mental illnesses that have been informed by my life as a migrant are still the same, So I talk about the life of precarity and undocumentedness in communities. But it's, there are people who have like citizen children and children who are dreamers, and some are on DACA and some are not on DACA. And there's just a lot of differences in status, and those change a lot for people.
Thank you. Yes, certainly that is something I've seen in my work and in my connection with undocumented or mixed status communities. The actual label or legal status in any given moment can feel arbitrary, but the sort of, I know you said lifestyle, but a little tongue in cheek, but sort of the community and the lived experience continues and has more of a through line to all these different statuses that someone or their family members might pass through. I'm going to turn it to one of the student panelists in a moment, but first I just wanted to ask the audience, just reminding you that you can submit questions in the chat as we go, and towards the end of the conversation, we'll bring some of your questions up to Karla. But now I'll turn it over to Julia.
Great. Thank you, Professor Kelly Whitmer. So to give a brief intro of myself, to give a little context to where my question is going, my name is Julia, and I was born in South Korea and moved to New York when I was 4 years old. And so I've been on DACA since the Obama administration signed off on it in 2012, meaning that I've been a recipient of DACA for close to a decade now. And it's taken me this long to recently start processing what it means to be labeled a dreamer, and the hidden toxicity that follows that term. And I happened to be reading your book, Karla, right around the shootings in Atlanta that brought a lot of spotlight onto the anti-Asian sentiment. And it got me thinking that the term dreamer and this whole idea of the model minority myth have something very alarmingly in common, and that they are segregating within an already isolated community. And I'm curious whether you've seen a connection between the undocumented community and other groups that have been targeted for a label that's essentially been created by society.
Yeah, it must have been really hard to be reading this book during that time. It is. It's people don't talk about. First of all, when people talk about being undocumented, they tend to think that the synonym of undocumented or the synonym of immigrant is like Latinx or Mexican, and they don't look at the demographics. Like there's a complete erasure of Asian immigrants and also Black immigrants. And I've been reached out to by a lot of readers who are like, I don't feel like I belong. You know, during the summer in Black Lives Matter protests, I was reached out to by Black immigrant readers who were like, I don't feel like I belong in the BLM movement, but I also in you know, the immigrant rights movement. It's like so coded Latinx that I don't feel like I belong. And I've been reached out to by a lot of Asian and Asian American readers who are like, this is my story too, but I'm not represented in any of the language or the imagery. And that must be incredibly painful in already, you know, a discourse that is about erasure. The American dream is obviously, so the context in which I discuss it is as someone who is perceived to have achieved it. I can talk about the toxicity of how it's not real and how it has caused my family so much pain. And also, I'm someone who every time I do an event, people are like, can you speak from your position as someone with privilege? And I'm like, I understand what you mean by that question, but also, do you understand that during the pandemic, I supported 3 households and had the pressure of supporting 3 households. And can you incorporate that, the psychic pressure that I had on me, reconcile that with your definition of privilege, and that you mean that I went to an Ivy League school. And that for like the Asian American community, that is an entire demographic that embodies that experience, where it's like, can you speak from a position of proximity to whiteness? Of like, it's the same question that's posed. And it's like, because of respectability politics, which is so demanded of all of us in order to be successful, there's a code of silence in which we're not allowed to talk about how hard it is. Even for me, who like I have finger tattoos of snakes, you know, like people are not expecting me to be nice. But when I wrote the piece in the New Yorker that I wrote recently about how hard it is for children of immigrants to take care of our parents, and that relationship is not really peachy all the time, I had people within the immigrant community tell me not to write that piece because it was like washing dirty laundry in public. And so I think that a lot of people who are outsiders don't understand the pressure that like children of immigrants who are Asian and Asian American have to be considered to be embodiments of the American dream, and to live with, you know, mental health issues, to live with complicated relationships with their parents, to be considered by white supremacy to be what, you know, to be considered wedges, you know, between them and other people of color, and to not be allowed to speak out about it, because none of us really are, because it's considered a secret that you know. So I think the reality is that we have to talk about it amongst ourselves as the first step, you know, in like among children of immigrants and among immigrants. We just have to make sure we're comfortable talking about the price we've paid for all of this and the price our parents have paid, and make it seem less shameful amongst ourselves, first of all, before we even begin to engage with outsiders. So that's what I'd say. And I think, Asian immigrants and African immigrants have had enormous pressure on them to be models of the American dream and to be model minorities, which is just a synonym for just bodies in which the American dream is projected onto. And as someone who is considered that, but is considered an exception to my demographic, I know how painful that is. But yeah, I think we should talk about it amongst ourselves, and I think that I always prioritize, mental health and healing first, before we engage with like white people and citizens.
Right. I mean, while reading your book, there were so many instances where I related to it, and it wasn't just because I was a daughter of an immigrant or because we've both been recipients of DACA, but I remember I saw in an interview that you gave a while back saying that you related the most with children of children of undocumented immigrants because of a similar emotional landscape, and I agreed to it was very familiar. And there's this good and bad dichotomy that exists in all of these groups, especially the immigrant community. And there's this unsaid resentment that kind of exists between immigrants because of different status. And so even with like people that are not immigrants kind of view it as one group, but within the community, there's like the undocumented, those who have DACA, those that are on visa, and those that have received residency or citizenship. And so I was curious whether you've noticed this resentment or tension between the people that you met while writing the book.
Yeah, I mean, I knew about it, right? Because you know about it growing up, you see it. I didn't notice it. It didn't come up in interviews. It didn't come up. People's relationships change because I did a lot of interviews over time. So of course there was drama among people and between people, but it was for a lot of reasons that where there was like power or perception of power, and status is one of those reasons, right? Like some people are like, well, this person got their status and they did this to get their status and they didn't deserve their status or they didn't suffer enough for their status. And there's certainly an idea, I think, in our community that you have to deserve your status by like suffering enough to get it, which is so perverse, right? But there are other things that because there's like the scarcity model, right? I think which unfortunately we subscribe to, which is like, and this is what leads to within, there's like 11, 12 million undocumented people in this country. And there are so many like ethnicities and like national groups between, and one of the reasons why it's so difficult to organize us is also, and to form coalitions is the scarcity thing, like where, I mean, aside from languages and class, I mean, there's so many different like classes. I think that's another thing. Like in the book, there are some people who are college educated. There are some people who didn't even finish elementary school, and then there's some resentment there. But those things are just human. Those things are just, you're going to see that if you go to any city, if you go to any town. I don't think but when you talk about like immigrants, when politicians talk about immigrants or the undocumented as a monolith, again, they're thinking about like, they're thinking about dreamers, or they're thinking about young Mexican men who are doing hard manual labor. But it's so many people. It's people of like, some people are just like very skilled carpenters. And then there are some people who are professors, and there's some people who are artists, and some people who are delivery men, and some people who are housekeepers. And it's I don't think that the average American thinks about just how much diversity there is within that number of like 11 million undocumented. We know, and there is a lot of resentment. I didn't notice resentment from the older folks that I interviewed towards dreamers, which surprised me, because I think I was an older person, and there were these like kids who got all of this attention and also preferential treatment with regards to status. I would be like, fuck off, you dumb kids, but they were so encouraging of me and of other. They were like, this person's a dreamer, and they're even the kids who weren't like going to college, they were like, this person has a kid or has a job. They really are, I think immigrants, I hate to say this, but they really are so focused on youth and on the next generation.
Thank you very much for that. I think that I personally can relate to a lot of the things you've been talking about, especially the model immigrant myth. And as an immigrant from Africa, I can attest to that's definitely a thing. And, I think that it is really hard when you hear these different rhetoric about like people you don't even know. And you begin to buy into the politics and begin to pick sides. And when, people use you as an example, I personally was always used as an example. Why can't they be like Don? Or why can't they, I'm going to school, I'm pursuing an education in an Ivy League school, all of that, I become this model that people use. And sometimes it gets into your head and you begin to be pitted against people who you actually don't even fully understand the story. And this is why I think that reading your book was personally I guess a life changer for me, because I joined the clinic because I wanted to learn more about these issues. I care about these issues, and but I when I think about immigrants, like you said, I don't think about the undocumented, right? So I guess my question in that regard is, how do immigrants, those who are the lawfully immigrants, how do we work with, what can we do to be able to overcome these stereotypes, to be able to overcome this tension that is in a way forced upon us against these other immigrants who are quote unquote undocumented?
I mean, I think you did the first step, which is to recognize that people were trying to cause this wedge. I mean, I remember in high school, I went to a high school that was like, with the exception of a few people that I could count on my hand, we were almost all Latino and African American, and teachers definitely tried to use me to talk to everyone in my school. I think 85% of people in my school were at or below the poverty line. And there was a lot of precarity with regards to housing. Some of my classmates were homeless. Some of them, there was a lot of difficulty going on. And I had both of my parents at home, and there was always food on the table, and I had stability at home. It wasn't always happy, as sort of I outline or suggest in the book. But they would try, the administration would try to use me because I was good at school to cause division within the student body. And they would try to say, look at how, studious Karla is. If Karla can do it, you can do it. And I think the first step is realizing that that's bullshit, recognizing the circumstances in your life that are not because of how special you are, but it's because of things you can't control. And so I would see that. I would see that I was chronically late to school, but that I was given a pass, I would see that sometimes there were assignments that I didn't want to do, but because I was a good writer, I'd submit a different assignment that was writing, and I'd get a good grade anyway. I would see that I was allowed to break certain rules, and because I was talented, I was still rewarded. And my classmates were breaking different rules, and because they were not talented in the ways that the teachers considered talent, they were not rewarded, they were punished. And I saw that, and I knew that was unfair. Also, my talent was not something that I woke up at 4 a.m. and just worked at. It was something that came to me. And some of it was sure, I read a lot and I worked at it, but a lot of it was luck, I was good at English, and my brother wasn't as good in a way that was recognized by teachers, and we had the same upbringing. We had the same parents. We had the same book. We read the same books. That was just luck. And I think that's the first step in recognizing that we all don't start, at the same point on the start line. I don't know running. I was on the track team though. And so what I would do is I would help, my classmates were like, can I copy your homework? I don't know why they didn't do their homework. If they were assholes, I didn't let them. But some of my classmates, like I said, were homeless. Some of them were just really nice and funny and were genuinely awesome kids. And I don't know, sometimes homework is boring. So I would say to transfer that into something that works into adulthood, look at your own life and understand what got you where you are right now and what factors that were outside of your control contributed to that. And I think that's something non-immigrants can do too, like Americans, white Americans, why are you American? What factors outside of your control, what factors that are chance or a God led you to where you are right now? And I think that goes a long way to creating empathy with people who have been dealt cards that aren't as favorable. And, even things that have to do with maybe you're an attractive person. You have had an easier time in life, I can guarantee you, if you are considered attractive, or if you are not overweight, or, there are certain things, if you have a fast metabolism, you've probably had an easier time in life. Things that are just completely outside of your control, just think about those. And I think that'll create a greater sense of empathy with not just immigrants, but with anyone who's been dealt a hard hand.
Thank you, Karla, for speaking on that, on positionality nationwide. I can really resonate with also the tokenization of immigrants that you spoke about. I'm wondering, as an undocumented immigrant at an Ivy League institution, I've observed that the life of wealth and privilege of the Ivy League is not universal amongst student populations. And for me, even though I attend such a renowned institution, I still find myself struggling with housing, food insecurity, and transportation at times. What do you think you can say about the experience of being an undocumented immigrant in the Ivy League or at Harvard? And what would you like the audience to know about this experience?
Oh, God. There was a fund while I was at Harvard. That was a long time ago. That was from 2007 to 2011. And that was to help those of us who were poor, who were on full financial aid, go to student events and things, and but they would sit you in the same section, and that was not great because you, first of all, you were all wearing clothes from Old Navy or from Kmart or something, and if you all sat in the same section, you knew, you were oh God, we all got the free tickets. So I would tell institutions to not do that. If they're going to comp your tickets to things so that you could be like the other kids, maybe sit you all in different areas so that you can have a greater chance of not being in the poor section. So that's a practical tip. Another thing is, if anyone in the audience is wealthy, reach out and donate for some kind of, give kids a stipend. Because undocumented kids, I don't know now, I really don't know now, but I couldn't have a job while I was on campus. I did babysitting. I hate kids. It was really tough on me. I did like the kids I babysat though. I did like them. They were special kids. They were nice. I taught one to sing the Smith song. I taught one of them to sing Smith songs, and Smith songs are dark. He was 4. I had this great guy who I knew from an educational nonprofit who, he was always appropriate, and this was done through the nonprofit, but he knew that I couldn't work while I couldn't do work study. and that my only way of like buying books or like a winter coat or things like that was through like babysitting. And so he gave me like a small stipend for some of my time at Harvard. He just like wrote a check, and he was like, he called it beer money, even though I really didn't drink until I was 21 because I was so afraid of breaking the law. And that helped me a lot. I remember going to the Gap in Porter Square and buying myself a pea coat and being like, this looks warm, and also things like I was able to be a part of this like arts semi-secret society, and they had like an induction, and I didn't have dresses. I only had dresses for church. And I went to the Buffalo Exchange and I got like a thrift store dress. And like that kind of stuff is important to make you feel part of college and to make you feel a part of the community and not ostracize yourself, because, you're already going to feel weird, and you're already so susceptible to depression and anxiety and, mental health issues coming up if you're undocumented and if you come from a poverty background. You want to have the opportunity to talk to other people, to socialize, to go to events, and not be like self-medicating and worrying about yourself. So I just really think it's, up to institutions or people who are wealthy to like give you guys a stipend if you're not able to do work study. And so you just have some pocket money to just be kids, because your parents are not going to give you that money.
Thank you for those thoughts. I totally agree that it's going to be like those ideas are like great equalizers on the playing field that is college. Here at Cornell, we're also like I organize, and we're also pushing for like cutting ties with ICE and establishing sanctuary campus through barring ICE officers from campus, instructing campus police not to cooperate with ICE or CBP, facilitating undocumented ally workshops, providing confidential legal support, and more through our student assembly resolutions 35 and 36. So thank you again for your thoughts.
That all sounds really great, and a lot more like institutional than like let them buy dresses for parties.
Well, I really like that idea too, as an undocumented immigrant. Another question I had, I really resonated with your New Yorker article on like almost the burden that parents face and the sacrifice that they have in moving and being undocumented. At age 11, for me, I faced and survived family separation. I'm also first generation low income. I've been on DACA since 2015. So for me, I faced severe hardship and actually was diagnosed with complex PTSD due to this and several incidences in my life. And due to immigration laws, I can't see my father for 10 years because of the 10-year bar. And it has been 9 years so far. So I guess coming from you and me, what would you like the audience to know about the effects of undocumented immigration on children as well as parents, and perhaps on family separation too?
The effects on mental health?
Yeah.
It's not studied enough, and there need to be more resources devoted to first of all studying it, because most of what I know is like what you know, which is like anecdotal, and most of what we know is taken from like studies done on like grandchildren of Holocaust survivors and children who have been in orphanages. There isn't a lot of research that we have on that are sort of directly applicable to what we are seeing now. I think it's going to be a huge mental health crisis that's going to last us for generations. And I think that there needs to be like a long-term investment in mental health resources and like low income and communities, not just for like the people who are children now and who are going to be dealing with a lot of trauma for their lives, but also for their parents and for their guardians. Like you really can't take care of those children without giving their parents the skills that they need in order to deal with what will be and their teachers, like without seeing like what will be perceived as temper tantrums or anger outbursts or behavioral issues, or like they're going to be diagnosed with ADHD, and they're going to be diagnosed as bipolar, and people are not going to understand that separation produces a lot of symptoms that are going to be misdiagnosed, especially in children, especially in boys of color, as anger, as especially like as anger. I'm really worried. I think a lot of these boys are going to be put in jail and killed because they're going to have a lot of angry outbursts. They're going to withdraw. They're going to self-medicate, and people are not going to notice and draw the connection before it's too late that they've all experienced some of this separation, which is not, and all of this is connected. It's not just like at the border, but it's like childhood separation due to mass incarceration. Like that is it too. And it's like all connected because these are private prisons. These are private detention centers. Like these are all the same people invested in making a profit out of separating families, and it's children who are going to be psychically harmed. And as someone who, I was separated from my parents, it was a choice. My parents left me in Ecuador, and it was 4 years, and it was nowhere near as traumatic as what's happening now or what happened to you. It was not a forceful separation. I'm 31, and I've worked extremely hard on my mental health, and I've had so much support, and I've had resources to do so, and it's been so hard. It has been so hard, and I'm doing okay now, but I have been not okay at many points in my life. And people who do not have the resources and support that I have had are going to have a really hard time.
100%. I concur. I think these are all like systemic effects, and these behavioral patterns are just going to continue to show up because of the magnitude of immigration today. So thank you for your words.
Right. I just want to continue with this conversation about mental health, and also just note that there are children that are still facing this anxiety and are constantly worried that they will get separated at some point. Like I know I get worried when like I think that my dad is going to get a speeding ticket, right? And that's not a normal worry that children will have for their parents. And I just kind of wanted to shift this conversation about mental health and bring up the Dream and Promise Act that was recently passed in the House. And if hypothetically this act were to be passed, it's most certainly going to be framed as this major victory and incredible moment to celebrate, which to a certain extent, I agree it is. But I think what people won't see or talk about is that many immigrants won't be benefiting from this act as well. And so there are many of us who won't be benefiting, such as our parents. And so I was wondering if you could comment on the impact of this legislation and how it's going to impact mental health in the immigrant community.
Yeah, I think that, sorry, my computer needs charge. I think that there isn't enough of a focus, and I think I've always wondered why on these, big bills that are proposed, it's an investment, and it's going to be more effective in the long run if there is a significant mental health component and a significant like educational component that, I want to choose my words carefully, that acknowledges the damage that has already been done to the communities and acknowledges the fact that so many of the migrants and the refugees in this country are here because of ethnic cleansings and terrible violence, narco violence, and wars that have been enacted because of U.S. weaponry and U.S. money in our countries. And so I think a good start would be legislation that includes money that returns to an investment into our immigrant communities into our low-income communities, into our Chinatowns. If you try now to look for Spanish speakers who are therapists or psychiatrists and are trauma-informed, you're not going to find people. And if you do, they're not covered. I mean, first of all, undocumented people are not insured, but if you try to pay out of pocket, as I have, they're extremely expensive. Something that I also tried to do when I was writing this book is because I was so interested in mental health, and because I knew growing up in New York that Asian elders in New York had I think the highest rates of suicide in the city. I wanted to write about that. And what I faced was that I would have had to do it through translators. And I wouldn't have been able to achieve the intimacy because I knew, because of like cultural traditions, they were not going to talk to me openly about mental health. And I would have really had to work really hard to gain that trust. And I couldn't do it through a translator. I knew that I wouldn't be able to. And so, we need to get to the bottom of that. For example, what's happening right now with the hate crimes against the Asian and Asian American community. There is already an epidemic of suicide among Asian elders in this country. And there is already an epidemic of like severe depression among Asian elders. I haven't seen that discussed anywhere in the media. People are pretty happy to share images of violence against Asian elders, but they're not talking about, and like they try to solve it through capitalism and being like, shop these Asian designers. Like buying Alexander Wang's not going to solve that. Sorry. Like you want an investment in our communities, like invest in mental health resources for Asian elders in Chinatowns. Like I reached out to different activists and they acknowledge that, I mean, gentrification impacts, these bills should have something about gentrification because there are so many elders, undocumented elders who are alone, who live alone and who age in this country alone, who end up homeless. And you end up homeless and it's a comorbidity. You end up homeless. And if you have undiagnosed mental health issues, I mean, you are also most susceptible to violence, to physical violence and sexual violence if you're out in the street. I mean, it's really complicated, but I think people are just doing like lowest hanging fruit, being like, how do we solve this? Like, let's, do a path for citizenship for dreamers. And it's like, if you really want to address the damage that's been done in our communities, there are other, I don't have a solution for what is going to get the most support for comprehensive immigration reform, but I do have other ideas for what is going to cause some long-term repair in immigrant communities. And I think those are just some of the ideas, which are like addressing high suicide rate among our elders, mental health issues for immigrants who are older, and gentrification, which impacts a lot of people who might end up homeless.
Right. And I just want to thank you for bringing that up and talking about the mental health issues and the violence that's been occurring in the Asian American community, mainly because when I see things on the news of like the elderly getting beat up, it kills me, not just because of obvious reasons, but also because I know that a lot of them are refusing medical help because they are undocumented, and the mental health that follows with it. And this isn't anything new, right? It's just being given spotlight on the news. So yeah, thank you.
And like also there should be a literacy about how to report on undocumented people. Like not just as like the topic is undocumentedness, but like other things happen to undocumented people. Undocumented people get married. Undocumented people have accomplishments. Like undocumented people are victims of crime. Like sometimes, like some of these people also don't want to be reported on because they might be they might be involved in ICE proceedings or something. If they get reported on, like they should be able to consent whether they get reported on too. And there is just such a lack of literacy in newsrooms of how to report on undocumented people too. So I think if we can raise awareness, if there are aspiring journalists, people here, you need to know how to report on people who are vulnerable. that includes undocumented people.
Thank you very much. I really, this has been a wonderful, wonderful conversation, and I have personally learned a lot from all your wonderful ideas. And Julia, thank you for bringing up the American Dream and Promise Act, because I was going to talk a little bit about that. And just to give some more information about the act before I ask my question. So it was passed in the House, and it does a few things that I wanted to highlight. So it creates a path for the Dreamers to gain citizenship, and also it's, they will first go through the permanent residency status, and then eventually they could qualify for citizenship. And then it also cancels the removal proceedings for people who are eligible for TPS, the temporary protection status, and people who suffered, disasters from their country and they come here and seeking shelter and refuge. It also creates status for farmer workers, a path to citizenship as well. And it repeals bars and restrictions on DACA recipients when pursuing higher education. And I know you probably had to deal with some of that you mentioned, not being able to work on campus, and some schools, they don't qualify, some states, they don't qualify for like financial aid, assistance, or even scholarships. So in a nutshell, it's a promising act. And I know that you said at the beginning of this interview that you don't want to make like personal commentary on like policies and laws. But there's something in your book though that did catch my eye. You talked about a story about a man, Nelson Pinos. I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name correctly, but the 44-year-old man, father of 3 children, who had to hide in a New Haven church for protection and to evade deportation proceedings. And I just wanted to know, I know you don't want to speak on public policy, but it seemed like you believe that, like from what you've said, like legislation is not enough. As a law student, I came to law school believing that law is the only way forward, with continuing education in the law and with whole knowledge of historical jurisprudence in this country, it's clear that just law is not going to change everything, right? It's a combination of so many things, community lawyering, but also changing people's hearts, education, and all these things combined. So I guess my question to you is, you've talked about some of your ideas, but what ideas can we as students, as institutions, as lawyers or aspiring lawyers, what can we do to bring about not just the policy change, but a general like social change and shift this sort of negative perception of immigrants and have a more sort of amicable experience in this country?
Well, I think lawyers are so important. Definitely, it's great for you to, you're gonna be more helpful than I am. Lawyers are going to be more, someone in the book says it, right? Someone in the book is like, what are you going to do unless you're like a lawyer or judge? I'm like, so y'all are doing great. Normal people, I just tell civilians, who I call civilians, to just tip well. I think during a pandemic, a lot of people, the restaurant industry, employs a lot of undocumented people. And the service industry does as well. And the world is taking shape in ways that we are still seeing and still figuring out right now. And a lot of people are doing deliveries. And so I would say a lot of people are doing deliveries in ways that may be permanent or in ways that they're just figuring it out until people are figuring out how many people are going to work from home once offices open up. Like people are still getting vaccinated. So I just tell everyone, obviously, vote. Obviously, vote thinking of not just like for presidential elections, but, vote for, vote down the ballot. But also just tip well. That's what you can do right now to support undocumented people in your community. Vote, and also like if you're ordering from the same places and you like the food, like leave a note for the people in the restaurant. Like my dad was a delivery worker for 15 years. And when people complimented him on his work, he was so happy. And when they tipped well, obviously. But last couple of weeks ago, there was this one, I live in Connecticut, which is unfortunate. Although I do like New Haven. I'm sorry if I insulted anyone. I love my Connecticut fans, but I do miss New York food. I was raised in Queens, where, I mean, it's just all immigrant food, right? So there is this one Chinese restaurant that tastes to me like a New York Chinese restaurant, which is like New York Chinese takeout, which is just a very particular thing, And I've been ordering from them for 10 years. And it's also, this was the same delivery guy all the time. So I just remembered, what my dad's experience was like. And I ordered at night, and I just am so pained by thinking how hard it must be to do deliveries right now, especially at night, especially if you're Asian. And my blood also boils at the thought of people who don't think about that while they're just like casually ordering something and don't understand that like they need that and they want that delivery. They want to do those, but like, it's also really scary. So I ordered my order, which is my dad's order when I was a kid. And I left a note for them. And I also, it's always, it's like rock stars just blow it on cocaine. I like to tip exorbitantly. And they sent me my food, and they did an eye, heart, and then they did a happy face. And I felt like so happy because my neighborhood is mostly white. And it's like they're immigrants and they're like 7 blocks away, and I'm an immigrant and I'm here. And I just felt a connection. And I knew that made them happy. And they were probably going to tell their kids about that because my dad always did that. And I felt happy too. And so that's what I tell everyone, just like, if you like their food, if you're just be a human being, just tell them, I like your food. This makes me happy, and tip them well. And they're members of your community. That really helps.
I love that. Thank you for that story, Karla. I think also in your work that you mentioned, like when it comes to forming community and deep relationships in general, like being undocumented has an influence on who you let in or not. But you emphasize like we are more than our resilience and our perseverance. Like we are not just our hard parts, but we are also warmth and change. So I think what you just said really speaks to that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks to Julia and Don and Stella and Karla. This has been so incredible. And in fact, I'm told we have lots of audience questions, and the audience has been really following along closely. And so I have one. It's from Julia, and then also side or connection to a question from Max. Could you speak to the importance and the function of the arts in regards to migration and racism? The question is, who has the right and responsibility to make art about these stories? And then the second part is, Max is an English major. How can literary works like this help enlighten people about different perspectives and experiences?
I mean, everyone has the right to do everything at all times. That is why I'm here in this country, right? I personally believe that you should do things if you're good at them and if you have something to say, like both those things, if you have something to contribute, so you can be a good writer, and you can also not have something to say, and there are plenty of people who do that and they're successful at it. And you can also have something to say and not be a good writer. You can be successful doing both those things. I think it's best when, if you are a writer who has something to contribute, I am queer. I don't have anything to say about that, like anything interesting. I don't have anything to contribute to that. I'm just like, like I like people who look like Timothée Chalamet. Like that is all I have to say on the subject. And that's not going to change the world. You know what I mean? So I don't write about it. So I think even though I have the right to, and people might be like, as a queer woman, does America want to hear my voice? Maybe. Do I have something to say? No. Do I think that I should step out of the way so that other queer people who have something to say should write about it? Yeah. So I think that, and I think the arts are important in allowing us to I think some people have an easier time thinking about what it's like inside other people's shoes. And I think literature helps us do that. And so does, other art. I enjoy Taylor Swift's songwriting, and Taylor Swift helps me imagine what it's like inside other people's shoes. So I think it doesn't have to be like high art, whatever moves you.
I really like that. And it's inspiring to think about, as individuals, like what part of our identity or what part of our experience is something that we are sharing with the world, and what part of our experience is not, for whatever reason. And I know in talking sometimes with students from Cornell University or other universities, sometimes the experience of being undocumented or DACA mixed status is something that's a big part of their identity, and that's something that they might be politically involved in or in our student group on campus. And sometimes it's not a focus, but is a part of that student, even as they are sort of pursuing other things in a public way. And the Dream Team actually asked this question for you, which is, how do you see your status changing, your legal status as it flows changing versus your identity changing? How should undocumented immigrants or any immigrants look at their status and identities separately while still understanding their positionality in America?
That's completely up to you. I hope to become a citizen because I get to vote. I changed my hair color a lot. So I'm someone who, I'm really inspired by drag. So I play with identity a lot. And, for me, I slip in and out of different personas all the time as an artist. And for me, the undocumentedness has always felt like a connection to like a world of art and literature, and also to a community of people who know how to survive in difficult circumstances. But it has never felt to me like a way, like something that dictated what I can and cannot do, or what I should or should not look like, or it hasn't constrained me. I mean, some things have constrained me. Like I do not like, I have not left the country. I'm very careful. Sometimes we've been, driving places and I'm like, are you sure that just make sure to not, we're not crossing the border anywhere. Like, are we, make sure we stay in Connecticut. And my partner's like, we are nowhere near Canada, so like, but, there are obviously limitations to what you can do. When I was a kid, I couldn't make money writing for a long time until DACA, obviously there are limitations. But even then, when I was a kid, I had to write to colleges individually. And there is, there's someone affiliated at Cornell who might be at this talk, who I emailed when I was in high school. I had to write to colleges individually and be like, well, will you accept me? Can I even apply to you? Like, are you even going to consider my application? Like, to individual admissions officers when I applied to schools. And some were like, no, and when I applied to grad schools, some schools accepted me. And then took away their admissions offer once they found out I was undocumented. It was a different time, but I was always like, even if something is not possible right now, I could be the first, you know? And I was the first for a lot of things. For the National Book Award, you had to be a citizen in order to even be nominated. But my publisher submitted a letter asking me to be an exception, and I was. So I think that if you're undocumented, and if something is not allowed, unless it's like, no, even if it is, if something hasn't happened yet, you could be the first. And once you're the first, it could create a precedent for people to come after you. So that is a big motivation to just try it.
That's so powerful. Thank you. And I wanted to just see if any of our students wanted to respond back to that. That was a question from our Dream Team student group. Stella, I don't know if you wanted to say anything in response.
Yeah, thank you for that answer. Somehow I feel more pressure. I'm like, oh yeah, now I have to be the first to accomplish everything. But,
or you could be the first person to just tell everyone to fuck off, and you're gonna like go make
There you go.
You know, it's it was really liberating when I decided to tattoo my hands, because that meant that I couldn't go to law school. Like I was sabotaging myself. So that meant I had to, I mean, this still has to do with success. You're going to have to like beat success out of me, the desire for success, you know? But like, I was like, I have to make it an art, because now I can't have a corporate job. Like my dad thinks, my own father thinks I'm an MS-13, you know, there's so much that I have said no to that has been scripted for children of immigrants. You know, I have carved my own path in so many ways where success was not guaranteed for me. You know, can you imagine what it was like to tell my parents, I'm going to be a writer? You know, they didn't care, because I was just crazy. So they were just like, you know, it was sort of like, me saying, like, I told them I was going to marry Ricky Martin, and they were just like, this is on the same level. Like, she's just, I mean, so long as she doesn't walk into traffic again, but you can just carve your own path. And that's what I like to, that's just what I tell children of immigrants. Like, you can just, if you just decide, and this is enough, if you just decide that you are the person that's going to be the first in your family to make boundaries, like to make boundaries with your parents or make boundaries with each other, or to say no to things, like that is big, because immigrant families don't have boundaries and immigrant families don't say no. And like, even if you do that, that's probably what I'm the proudest of in my life, regardless of what I've accomplished, is that I'm not making the same mistakes my parents have made with regards to boundaries and toxic relationships. And I've worked hard at that, but I take my peace over any accomplishment.
100%. I really commend you for that. And I really like what you said about like positionality. That is, say, like says socioeconomic class where you may start out, but it is flexible. And though like undocumented immigrants have major obstacles in front of them, they are, as you said, like one of the strongest communities and like people who can survive, who are really good at surviving. So thank you for that. Yeah.
As we approach the end of our time here, Karla, I had another question in the audience from Oscar. He was just wondering if you could comment on your objectives in your doctoral studies in American Studies at Yale, and what projects might you have in the pipeline that we could learn about, if you have anything you wanted to share.
Yes. So my objective, and I'm just trying to get my degree. I applied to graduate school because, again, DACA didn't exist at the time, and I didn't have anything to do after college. And someone said you should try to get a PhD, and I applied, and it was great. I it was a great opportunity to learn. I learned a lot about anthropology and literature, and I was able to work on my writing, and I got health insurance. But now I'm going to get my PhD. I have a couple of books that I will work on. The next book is a young adult novel that I think is coming out next year. And that's the next immediate project.
Thanks. That's so exciting. And we just wanted to thank you so much for joining us today, Karla. It's been an amazing pleasure to get to speak with you. And I really appreciate the students, Julia, Dawn, Stella, for sharing their stories too and making this a really interactive conversation. I wanted to mention to the audience that Karla's book, of course, is available in hardcover now and in paperback very soon on April 6th. And we have a slide that should be showing with a way to purchase that book. Her article in the New Yorker is linked in the chat, and you can connect with her on Instagram as well. And you can also connect with the Cornell University Dream Team on Instagram too. So we're sharing those resources. Thank you so much, everyone. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you for having me. It was really nice meeting everyone.